Ruoli hugged Roma's waist tightly and asked excitedly, "Mom, why are you here? How did you come in?" Roma saw that the Japanese soldiers had retreated, and said, "Ruoli, your father asked me to come." "Dad?" Ruoli asked hurriedly. "How is Dad now? Has he returned to China? There is no danger, right?" Roma shook her head and said softly, "Don't worry, your father is fine. He has returned to Eastcliff safely." Ruoli just breathed a sigh of relief and muttered, "Dad is fine." Roma said, "If Ruoli, your dad originally wanted to come to Japan to rescue you personally, but he is now the subject of strict monitoring by the Japanese National Security Department, so it is not convenient to come to Japan again in a short time, so he let me meet you." Ruoli was very puzzled and asked, "Mom, the self-defense forces kept me so tight, how did you get in? Why did they let you in?" Roma said, "The Japanese authorities have indeed reached the highest level of control over you, and your dad has inquired about it. They hope to sentence you and several principal offenders to death. In order to save you, your dad spent a lot of money on the self-defense forces. The high-level officers have a good relationship and are ready to rescue you. Help me out?" Ruoli exclaimed, and asked, "How is this possible? The Japanese self-defense forces guard me very closely now, and there are tens of thousands of self-defense forces on the ground. Soldier, how could you rescue me from here?" Roma explained, "Although you are currently being detained by the Japanese self-defense forces, the self-defense forces cannot represent the Japanese judiciary after all, so you still have to be tried by a Japanese court, and according to Japanese law, you are to be escorted back to the place where the case was committed. The court accepts trial." Ruoli asked hurriedly, "Then we are going to be escorted to Tokyo for trial?" "Yes." Roma nodded and said, "The Japanese self-defense forces will use their military transport aircraft to send you back to Tokyo. After arriving in Tokyo, the Special Operations Team of the TMPD will be responsible for escorting. At that time, your father will arrange a stand-in in Tokyo, and with the help of a senior from the TMPD, you will be replaced." Ruoli was dumbfounded, and only after a long while she asked, "Mom, can you change me out so grandiosely?" Roma took her hand and said seriously, "Don't worry about this, your father has already arranged it. Before the double is found out, he can buy you 12 hours. At that time, your father will arrange for you to travel from Tokyo port. Leave Japan by boat." With that, Roma squeezed Ruoli's hand and said with emotion, "Ruoli, to save you this time, your father spent nearly 1 billion yuan to clear the relationship between the self-defense force and the TMPD. If you can return home safely, and you must repay your father well in the future." Ruoli's eyes were red, and she nodded while crying, and choked up, "Mom, don't worry, I will repay my father well." Roma nodded and said, "Also, after you return to China this time, the Japanese side will definitely do everything possible to catch you back. If they know that you have returned, they will definitely apply to our country and extradite you. Go back to Japan for trial, so after you go back, you have to live under a different name. You will no longer be able to use this name in the future." Ruoli hurriedly asked, "Mom, if I can no longer be called Ruoli in the future, what should I call?" Roma said, "Your dad said, you can pick up the name as you like, and he will help you get the relevant household registration information." Ruoli flashed a flash of joy. Just as she was about to speak, Roma added, "Ruoli, your father said, you cannot continue to have the last name Su, or you can call any name other than Ruoli, but you can't use the character of the Su family." Ruoli's expression of joy just now became extremely bitter. She looked at Roma and asked, "Mom, Dad still doesn't want others to know who I am?" Roma said with an ashamed expression, "Ruoli, you are your father's illegitimate daughter after all, and few people know about this. Apart from your father, only your grandfather knows about the relationship between your father and me. Leona, if she knows that your father still has an illegitimate daughter like you, she will definitely break with your father." Ruoli choked up and said, "Mom, can't I tell others that Zin Su is my father all my life? Do I have to be a girl who has no father since childhood?" Roma's eyes were red, and she sighed, "Ruoli, the reason why your father had that past with me back then was entirely my own request. He didn't even know your existence for many years, so you can't blame him. Unwilling to disclose your identity. What's more, your dad paid a very high price to save you this time. Even if he can't publicly claim that you are his daughter, deep down in his heart, he also loves you very much. Can't blame him, do you understand? Ruoli sighed when she heard this, nodded slightly, and said seriously, Mom, I know, don't worry, I will never mention this matter again in the future, let alone blame Dad in my heart. Roma squeezed Ruoli's hand hard, and said seriously, in a few days, you will be escorted to Tokyo. Then someone will contact you, replace you, and send you to the dock. Mom will be waiting for you at home. Ruoli hurriedly asked, Mom, won't you wait for me in Tokyo? Roma shook her head and said, Your dad said, once you successfully escape, Japan will definitely check everyone who has recently entered the country. At that time, if it is found that I am from China and I have been to Osaka, the incident will happen again. I went to Tokyo before, which meant that I gave the Homeland Security Department a complete clue for nothing. So after he told me to meet you, I immediately returned from Osaka to avoid leaving clues. As for Tokyo, he will arrange for others to meet you. Ruoli nodded and said, Okay Mom, I know. You wait for me to go back in peace in China. At this time, someone opened the door and said, Time is almost up. Roma looked at Ruoli reluctantly, and said, Ruoli, take care of yourself these few days, Mom will go. Ruoli nodded gently with tears. Mom, take care, and also help me to say thanks to Dad. Roma patted her arm and whispered, There is no 100% success rate in everything, but you must promise Mom and come back alive.